Hello, and welcome to Finale to Dorico, Conquering the Transition. My name is Jason Loffredo, and today we're going to explore the MusicXML conversion process. Now, I know that there are many Finale users out there with hundreds, if not thousands, of Finale projects that they just want to get converted to Dorico as quick as possible. And this process can seem a bit daunting, and in some ways it is, but my philosophy here is that the accuracy is paramount, and a little bit of knowledge about how MusicXML transfer works between Finale and Dorico will definitely go a long way. But the TLDR version of this, if I must, is that the MusicXML conversion works reasonably well, but ... And it's really the but ... that I'm really going to dig into here in this video. I think when you know what to expect, where things work really well and where there's some potential lost in translation moments, it should make it easier to make the conversions happen a little bit more smoothly. Now, obviously, we're converting from Finale to Dorico, so we're exporting XML out of Finale and importing into Dorico. So let's start on the Finale side with Finale MusicXML export. So let's go to Finale, let's go to the File menu, and there's an Import and Export submenu. And at the bottom of both of these menus is the MusicXML preferences. It doesn't matter which one you use, it goes to the same window, which is this one. And there's a bunch of options here on the export side. I guess we'll ignore the import side for now, including versions, MusicXML 4.0 all the way back to 1.0. Now, the last two, 1.0 and 1.1, are not available. That has to do with the bottom option here for whether or not you're exporting compressed or uncompressed. You can only export uncompressed in 1.0 and 1.1. So it doesn't matter compressed or uncompressed. I would recommend compressed, just the files are a little bit smaller. The data is exactly the same between the two, so might as well choose compressed. Now, a little bit about MusicXML and why there's different versions. Think of MusicXML as a translator, right? You have a person that translates from one language to another. The MusicXML format is basically that translator. The programs themselves have sort of proprietary data, and it converts that to this MusicXML code, which is almost plain language. If you actually look at the uncompressed file, it'll read like, bar 1, beat 1, D sharp, for a quarter note. I mean, it almost reads like basic English. It is coded language, but that's basically how it works. But each version added more types of data. So in version 1.0, it might have just been the very simple data of notes and pitches and rhythms and all that stuff and a few other markings. With each version, they added more information. We are currently up to 4.0, and Finale 27.4.1 uses MusicXML 4.0. Dorico 6 also uses 4.0, so they're both on the same version. However, it doesn't really matter which one you choose. If I were to choose to export to 3.1, Dorico, being 4.0, can still read that. It's just that there's extra data in the 4.0 file that Dorico won't be able to take advantage of. So it's backwards and forwards compatible, MusicXML is. So it doesn't matter. I recommend just choosing 4.0. I recommend including the linked parts in compressed files. It's just, again, it's more data to the MusicXML translator file. There's also this option at the bottom to include subfolders. There is a way to export multiple files at once in Finale. I'll show you how to do that, but you really should have this option checked. Otherwise, it will only look in the folder you're looking at, and it will ignore the Finale files in the subfolders. So anyway, this is how I have my export options set in Finale, and I would suggest that you do the same. And so we'll just click OK. And then in order to actually do the conversion, what you do is you go back into the File menu, you go to Export, and you choose MusicXML. And it will ask you where you want to put it, and you click Save. Now, I've already done this, so I don't need to do that, but that's basically the process. If you wanted to export a folder, you would choose the option Translate Folder to MusicXML, and it would ask you which folder to choose, and in this case, I would choose this one, and it would take all of the Finale files and it would convert them. So those are the options for exporting XML out of Finale. Now, let's start looking at the Dorico side. Dorico has options for the import. So let's go to the Dorico preferences under MusicXML, and you see there's options for import and there's options for export. Obviously today we're going to be dealing with the import primarily, so let's look at these options. And there is a bunch of options. If you scroll down, there's a bunch of things that you can check basically. Now, I really recommend when you start this process, you kind of start to understand what these things mean and really read the descriptions. The note durations, for example. Note durations will match those specified in the MusicXML file exactly, as if input using forced durations. Hopefully you've been using Dorico long enough, you've watched some of my videos, you know what this means. You know that having forced duration turned on has a certain implication in Dorico. So with this option checked, force duration will be turned on for all of the note entries. If you uncheck it, then force duration will be turned off. And basically what this means is that with the option unchecked, you're allowing Dorico to impart its notation and engraving options on that particular item. With an option checked, you're asking Dorico to freeze it so that it matches more precisely the XML file that you're importing. Now, whether or not you choose to have Dorico match the finale file, or you allow Dorico to import the XML file and impart its own options on the file, is entirely up to you, and that can be different for each situation. And there's a lot of different things: stem directions, tie placement, beam groups, accidental visibility. There's other things for rests, rest visibility, dynamic placement, slur directions. This one at the bottom, import system and frame breaks. This will retain the casting off from the original file. So whether or not that's checked or not checked has a big difference. So again, it really just depends on the situation, how you have this set up. Now, currently I have this set so that everything is checked, right? So we're going to close the preferences, and the way that you would open a MusicXML file in Dorico is actually you can just use the button at the bottom of the Steinberg hub, open or import file, or you can just go up here and choose the open. You don't necessarily need to import the MusicXML file, although you can import it into a existing file. I'll show you that later on in this video, but you can also just open it and it will basically open it in what would be a default file in Dorico. So you just press that and you select the file. And in this case, we're looking for the .mxl file. MXL is the MusicXML compressed file format. So that's the one that we're going to look for, and I'll press open. But I'm going to pause here a second. I do want to switch my screens around, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this file, this row, row, row your boat file, which I've already converted to MusicXML, right? I'm going to open this file in two different ways according to different scenarios based on the MusicXML file. So one way I'm going to do it is with all of the options checked, and then I'm going to do it again to a second file with all of the options unchecked, so we can start to see the differences. Now, I'll point out that with a simple file like this, there's not going to be that many differences. I'll show you a little bit more of a complicated file later so that we can see some even more of the differences there. So hang tight with me 1 second. I'm going to go away. I'm going to set up my screen a little bit differently, and I'll be back in a second. All right, so now I've got two Dorico files open, and the one in the middle is the conversion with all of those import options unchecked. The version on the right is with all of those import options checked. Now, there's not much of a difference, but the main difference between both of them and the finale file that you might notice right away is the titles. The thing is that when Dorico imports a MusicXML file, it imports it into a new flow, and Dorico doesn't know necessarily if the project you intend to start is going to have multiple flows or not. So it just sets it up as if it were to have multiple flows. I think I've talked about this before, but if you know you're only going to be using a single flow in a file, you want to turn off the flow heading. So we can do that real quick in these files here. Just select all of these, look for flows, show flow heading, never, apply. This is the layout options, by the way. We do the same thing over here. Layout options, select all the layouts, flows, show flow heading, never, apply. And that will fix the titles in those two files fairly easily, right? Now, if we look at the actual material, like the notes and the lyrics and the markings and the instruments and everything, they look all the same. I mean, everything's exactly the same between the two Dorico files with the options unchecked and checked and the finale file, right? Simple data converts fairly easily, and this is a very simple song. It's only 8 measures. There's not a whole lot of complexity here, and everything just converts perfectly fine. So the data itself really is, pretty solid in the conversion. Where some things get a little bit squirrely is with layout, right? If you look at the version on the right where you have the options checked, what Dorico is doing is it's trying to match the casting off of the original file. And if you note in the finale file, hopefully you can see this. I know I've got a lot of stuff on the screen here, but you'll see that the merrily, merrily, merrily measure is at the end of the first system. And according to Finale's spacing algorithms, it thinks that fits. But in Dorico, that's not actually the case. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that the fonts are different, right? The lyric font is a lot wider in Dorico than it is in Finale. So you're going to have a lot more cramped spacing in Dorico when you try to force the same amount of measures onto that system, because that's what's happening. You have the frame breaks and the system breaks basically forcing the casting off to match the original Finale file. In some cases, this is good. In some cases, this is not. And in fact, In this particular case, it's better to allow Dorico to recast it off so that it looks a little bit cleaner. And you can see in the middle version, with all of the options unchecked, that's exactly what happened. Now, of course, you can always change that in the other file just by deleting the breaks. It will actually end up looking exactly like the other one, right? So it's just a matter of which version do you want? Do you want to absolutely match the casting off or not? And that particular option in the MusicXML options is towards the bottom here under other notations. It's this option here, import system and frame breaks, maintains the same casting off as the original MusicXML file, provided system and frame breaks are specified. So with this unchecked, it's not doing that, which means that it's allowing the measures to flow naturally. With this checked, it's inserting these frame and system breaks to match the original XML file. So again, it just depends what you want to do, whether or not you check or uncheck that particular option, and these are the varying results. Now, there's one other interesting technical thing related to this is the spacing of the margins. You note that the Finale version, the margin's a little bit smaller on the left versus the Dorico versions. This is one of those areas where there's a little bit lost in translation because of the way that Finale handles margins. If I go to the page layout tool, what you'll see here is the page margin here, and what lines up with the page margin is the left bar line right here, and the staff names are allowed to spill over the edge of the left bar line. Well, Dorico handles that a little bit differently, actually. If I go to engrave mode on one of these files, what you'll see is that, I need to make this bigger so you can see it, is that the left margin here, the staff labels are inside the margin. So that's why these systems are an awful lot farther to the right than they are in Finale. This fix, if you want to change that, again in the layout options, we are looking for staffs and systems and staff labels, and we're looking for the option down here with width, position staff labels inside music frame or outside music frame. You also have to change the indent, and let's put this at 5 and apply the indent when staff labels are shown. And doing both of those things will make this a little bit more similar to how Finale treats this particular left margin. Now you can see they match up a little bit better. Sorry, there we go. You can see that that's a little bit better. So yeah, I mean, it's very close. There's a few things here and there that just don't translate or do translate in a certain way. Again, this is just the very beginning. This is a very simple file. There's another file I want to show. I've created something called the kitchen sink file, which has a bunch of different things. So we're really going to dive into the differences between having the options unchecked versus checked, and we'll also really get to see, you know, what converts well and what might be slightly problematic. So give me one more second. I'm going to, again, change my screen around and get those other files up. So hang tight. All right, so I've got this other file that I've created in Finale. I'm calling it the XML kitchen sink test file. I've literally just put a bunch of stuff I can think of to see how it converts in Dorico. And there's just a bunch of random things with, you know, different instruments and slash notations and chords and percussion stuff, all kinds of different text, just to kind of see what happens when we convert that through Dorico. And let's just open the version. This is the version with all of those options checked. And you'll see that it matches fairly well. I mean, there's definitely some differences, and I'm going to try and walk you through a little bit of these so you can understand what it is you're going to expect. First of all, you might notice the titles, right? In the Finale file, all of the titles are designed with funny fonts and different styles and everything. None of that gets converted to Dorico. This is one of the areas where there's a little bit of lost in translation issues going on between Finale and Dorico. And if you're familiar with some of my videos recently about engrave mode, particularly about the page template sets and how these the titles are designed and everything in these page template sets, you understand that that system is entirely different than what Finale does with titles on the page. They are more or less incompatible in a lot of ways, which is why a lot of this title information just doesn't make it into the Dorico file. Now, this is an area where potentially Dorico could make some improvements in the future where they could actually figure out a way to get these titles designed into the page template sets, but that is a super complicated process and might take a little bit more engineering to figure out. So for the time being, that title information just doesn't make it over into Dorico. It is there in the MusicXML 4.0 file, it just doesn't make it over. So that's why you're seeing it, all of these composer arranger items not appear on the page. What does make it over, interestingly, if I go to the Finale file and open up the score matter to the file info, I set this up specifically so we could see what happens. The title's called title, subtitle's called subtitle, etc. Just so we can see where all of these text inserts go in the Dorico file. So I have this set up like this, and if I go over to Dorico and go into the project info, the only thing you'll see on the project side is the title, but on the flow side, you will see all of those options. So title, composer, arranger, lyricist, and copyright. I believe the only one that's missing is the one called description in the score manager in Finale. So most of this stuff gets into the project info in some way or another. It just doesn't get onto the page because how you insert those tokens in Dorico is entirely different than Finale. So this is one area where you're not going to quite get the exact match between the two programs. Page formatting will transfer over there. If we look at the document page format for the score and Finale, you'll see that this is set up on 10 by 13 paper, which is actually a custom size. Let me go to centimeters here to see the staff height is set to 0.533 centimeters, which is 5.3 millimeters. And if we look at the Dorico side for the score, we'll see it's on 10 by 13, and it's on 5.38 millimeters. So that actually transfers over pretty well. However, what doesn't transfer in this regard is the page formatting for the parts. The parts in the Finale file are on 9 by 12. The size is 7.6 millimeters. And in Dorico, in the layout options for the parts, it's on letter size and it's at 7.0. So this is another area where Dorico is not quite getting the information from the linked parts into the layout options of all the parts. Again, this could be an area for potential improvement down the road. Another thing you might notice in the grand scheme of things is that this is a transposed score, but in Dorico, it comes in as a concert pitch score. Easy enough to switch that over and you get the result that you want. Interestingly, most of the instruments convert really well. If you look at the Finale file, I mean, I created some not unusual instruments, but definitely, clarinet in A, piccolo trumpet in A actually comes through. You see the piccolo trumpet in A in the Dorico file as well. The baritone and tenor clef with the B-flat transposition, that also comes through. The triangle, even the onde martineau instrument will come through in both. The only one that did not convert is the timple. And I did this intentionally because I knew that the Finale defines this instrument called the timple, which is sort of a ukulele type of instrument. And I knew that Dorico didn't have the timple. So I wanted to see what happened when I did this. And what happens is that it comes through, it says timple, it's in the right, clef, the right key, the notes are there, they're pointing as red, which means that they're out of range for some reason, but more or less the instrument, gets added as it is in the Finale file. So that's actually pretty good. But under the hood, actually if we go to the setup mode, what's interesting is that the timple instrument, if I go to the edit instrument definition, like I said, there's no timple instrument that Dorico defines. What it did is it modified the timpani because T-I-M-P are the first four letters. It's just guessing that the timpani was the closest instrument that it could find to the timple, which is hilarious because it's a completely different instrument. But anyway, it actually edited the timpani in Dorico to have the clef that it needed and everything. So again, sometimes when you're using unusual instruments like that, something like that may occur. But for the most part, all of the instruments converted, perfectly fine. Another thing that doesn't quite convert the same is the bracket changes. So there were some custom bracketing I did in Finale. You can see the triangle and drum set is not bracketed, but in Dorico it is bracketed. The violins are sub-bracketed here where they're not sub-bracketed here. So again, a little bit of a variation there, which should be easily fixed in Dorico. Another thing that doesn't quite relate in Dorico and Finale is instrument changes. So in Finale, on the flute part, if I scroll over, at some point I had an instrument change to piccolo, and I'm sure you know how to do this in Finale. You go to Utilities, Change Instrument. Again, this is one area where Finale and Dorico differ very, very much, because basically what you do is you just have one staff for that player, and then just switch the player on that staff. Well, in Dorico, you know at this point, hopefully, that the way that you do this is you set up extra instruments for the players, and you actually end up with extra staves ultimately, and Dorico handles the switching in the score. Well, it doesn't set up like that in Dorico in the XML conversion, and what ends up happening is that you get the text and all that stuff does convert, and you get your piccolo part. It is an octave too high because that's where it sounds versus where it's written, and it's on the flute staff. If you can see that there, the staff label still says flute. So this is another thing that's not quite transferring correctly. And again, just the difference between the way that Dorico handles doubling instruments versus Finale is so vastly different. This is another one of those moments where you have a little bit lost in translation. It even added an extra independent key signature change. Like if this was like going to clarinet, this would be the way that you would do this here. But anyway, this is another area where they just haven't figured out how to engineer that yet. But otherwise, let's look at some other stuff, because a lot of this does get translated correctly. Like I wrote some really wrong funny rhythms in the flute part here in the fourth measure. You see that I don't know what those rhythms are, but in the file where I have all of the options checked, Dorico respected that. It actually had those rhythms, put in incorrectly. Now, the way that this is happening, if you go to the XML import options again, it's because of this option with note durations will match those specified exactly as if input using forced duration. And in fact, when you start to select these notes, you'll see that the forced duration button is depressed here, which means that all of these notes, in fact, every single note in this file, if I select anywhere, even the rests have forced duration on. And that's what's allowing this funny rhythm, which really wouldn't normally be allowed in Dorico's notation options, to be displayed. Now, if I just simply turn off forced duration, it's going to revert those to the notation options, and that's still a funny rhythm, but that is more correct the way, according to the way that the duration options are selected. Now, there's something else going on here with the beams, again, because the beams are also frozen solid. And what I mean by frozen solid is they're frozen to exactly the way they are in the original file. Actually, let me show you, for this particular example, let me show you what this looks like in the version where the options are all unchecked. You can see that this actually looks a little bit better with the beams in the right places and the rhythms a little bit more normal versus this. So this is a major difference, again, between having the options checked and unchecked. There's just so much that gets frozen with all of these options checked, including the note durations, including the way the beams are grouped, including the rest durations and the rest positions and visibility and all that stuff. So it really, you really do have to go through these options sometimes and decide which of these makes sense to check for each scenario and each file that you're importing. I was curious about articulations because in Finale, there's a thing in the articulation tool where you can have these combined articulations either as one articulation or as two. Actually, if I open the window, you'll probably remember there's a single staccato articulation, a single accent articulation, but there's also a combined articulation. And it doesn't matter whether or not you use the individual ones or the combined ones. You kind of get the same result. They do look a little bit different in Finale, but I was curious to see what would happen in Dorico. And interestingly, it handles this perfectly well. Both versions have both articulations. So the A here has both the staccato and the accent, as does this one, even though they're set up differently in Finale. So that's actually nice that it fixes that. Most of the ornaments get transferred. This particular one did not, but other than that, they all did. One thing here is the parenthesized notes didn't get quite done right. And again, this is related to this idea that in Finale, sometimes articulations are not articulations. I did these parenthesized notes as articulations in Finale, but you wouldn't do that in Dorico. In Dorico, there's a properties panel option for this. So you go into the properties panel, and I believe it's over here bracketed, and that's how you do that. So it kind of looked at those items, the left and right separate bracket, and didn't know what to do with it, and it just created them as text items, actually, and that's the result. So really close. Most of this stuff translates, but a few random things like that would end up being problematic, right? I was curious about the text blocks because in Finale, there's actually 3 different ways to put text on the page. There's measure attached text blocks, there's page attached text blocks, and there's expression text blocks. I was curious to see how Dorico would handle this translation, and interestingly, it did it fine. It actually put all three of them attached to the bassoon part, and it kind of does look like these three are attached to the bassoon part, although technically, interestingly, this page attached text block really is not attached to the bassoon part whatsoever. Dorico just interpreted it as being attached just based on the position. So that's actually probably really helpful in the long run. Even the percussion note heads got translated. The way that Finale does triangle notation on the single line triangle is to use the triangle note heads. I don't think that's how Dorico normally does that, but it actually did include the triangle note heads, despite the fact that it normally wouldn't. Same thing with the drum set part. If we scroll over to the drum set part in Finale here, you can see I've got the wood blocks and the cowbells all set up with triangular note heads. I mean, it's almost exactly correct. There's an extra hole rest in the Dorico here, but other than that, everything's on the right line and right space with the right note head. It all kind of looks exactly the same. I was curious about slashes and chords and rhythmic notation and everything, and we can kind of see that, yeah, most of it converts perfectly fine. The rhythmic notation on the bottom, actually in Finale, this I did two different ways. I did this as a staff style, but I also did it as an individual change to the note heads, which is another way you can do it in Finale. Not recommended, but it is a way to do it. And indeed, in Dorico, it actually converted both methods to the rhythmic notation style, which is kind of nice. Same thing with the slash notation. It turned it into a slash region. The one bar repeats, it turned into a one bar repeat region, perfectly fine. The one thing that does get squirrely here is in Finale, in order to get these counts, you do have to add them as a text. And so when that came over, you get this text 4, but this 4 is actually a property of the one bar repeat region. So that's another area where you might have to get rid of some of those extraneous text items that get attached there. One thing I noticed is that in Finale, I had set up these 7/8 measures to be a little bit different. So in the triangle part, you see it's 2 plus 2 plus 3, 2 plus 3 plus 2, 3 plus 2 plus 2. Now, in the Dorico file where I have the options checked, you see that it does beam it 2 plus 2 plus 3, 2 plus 3 plus 2, 3 plus 2 plus 2. However, the 7/8 itself, if you double click it, is just entered at 7/8. And normally when you do it that way, you'd get 4 plus 3 beaming in 7/8, and it would be like that for all three measures. Well, Dorico set the 7/8 up as the 4 plus 3 for all three measures, but it froze the beams to match the divisions in the Finale file. Let me look at the other one here where the options were unchecked. And yeah, you can see what happens is that it's just 4 plus 3, 4 plus 3, 4 plus 3 in that 7/8 measure. So again, depending on what options you have checked and how they're done, this might be another area where you'd need to make a change. Like for example, the 7/8 might have to be re-entered as 2 plus 2 plus 3, square bracket over 8, and then add another one, which is 2 plus 3 plus 2, and then another one, 3 plus 2 plus 2, etc., so that you can get those divisions correctly done on the other instruments if you add to this. So again, it's a little bit of a compromise. If your goal is to simply match the Finale file and you know that you're not going to do any changes, this is fine. It's not technically correct the way the 7/8 is set up like this, but it's showing exactly the way it's showing. And if you don't need to do any further work to the file, then that's fine. If you need to start modifying things, then maybe it would be recommended to have more things unchecked so you get more raw data in a way, right? And then when you make the changes to the time signature here, we can do 2 plus 2 plus 3, square bracket over 8. When you actually make those changes, it will update the beaming to reflect that. And then I could do, 2 plus 3 plus 2 in the next one, etc. So again, depending on what you're trying to accomplish with these XML file conversions, if you need to do further work, sometimes it's better to have more options unchecked so that you can impart more of Dorico's options upon the file. All right, and sort of in conclusion to all of this, the MusicXML conversion is not perfect, but considering all of the technical challenges, especially with the titles and the page template sets and the different ways that Finale and Dorico handle instrument changes, for example, considering all of that, it's fairly remarkable the fact that it gets so much right. But again, you can take advantage of these options and check and uncheck at will. You don't have to have everything checked or everything unchecked. If you don't want to deal with it, if you don't want to have the stem directions frozen, you uncheck that. If you don't want to have the beam groups frozen, you uncheck that. You know what I mean? So you can absolutely go through here, piecemeal and decide what things need to be frozen, what things need to be not frozen, and go from there. And that's going to be different on every single file and everything that you import. So, and sometimes you can play with it. Like if you import it and it doesn't look right, go back and figure out which one of these options is giving you trouble, whether you need to reset according to Dorico's options, then you would uncheck, etc. So, again, there's a lot of flexibility here. You just kind of have to understand. And I really can't recommend enough, before you get going on this process, read these options. Figure out what it is that Dorico is or is not freezing in certain scenarios. I think it'll just make the process a lot better. And once again, just to reiterate the fact that the better you know Dorico, like the fact that you know what forced durations are and how that works, that would give you a lot more insight as to whether or not you should check or uncheck that option. So just to reiterate the fact that yes, you should be exporting out of Finale as soon as possible because the XML is frozen in Finale, right? But when you import into Dorico, one, the import options could improve in further versions, and two, you're going to know the program a lot better further down the road. So really, the best advice is to import the XMLs when you need them. Don't do everything all at once and then, 6 months from now, try and go back to that file and try and figure out what happened. Just import it as you need them. That's my best advice here. All right, so I'm going to show you a couple more things. I have a couple more files I want to show you, and I need to reset my screen for that, so sit tight one more minute. So what I've been showing you up until now is how to literally open a MusicXML file in Dorico, which literally imports it into a default document. And you do that with the open function in the file menu or in that button on the bottom left corner of the Steinberg hub. But there's also a way to import MusicXML files as a new flow into a currently existing project, which is what I'm going to show you here in this file. So I've got this Brahms piece that I've been showing you in previous videos, and what you would do here is you go to the file menu, and under import you would choose MusicXML, and then from here you would find the file that you need. In this case, I'm going to actually import the first movement again from this file, and I'm going to click open, and you can have the option to create all new players or merge with existing players where possible. I'm going to choose this option for now, and I'm going to click OK. And what it's going to do is it's going to add a third movement, which just happens to be the same as the first movement, but it is a third movement. Now the title is different, right? Because it's calling it the main title of the piece, not the title of the movement, but it's almost exactly the way that you want it. The advantage here is that now the settings in this file will now apply to this XML import. And same thing with the flow headings will all work out, the titles and everything, that will all be consistent with the rest of the file. In fact, this file uses a different font. It uses the Nepomuk paragraph style here. It also uses the Leland music font, just to show you that when you do that, you can import those XML files into this file to get it to look more correct. And this will solve a lot of those problems with the page template sets with the titles and everything, as well as some other issues you might have had with however you have things set in the notation or layout or engraving options, right? So this is definitely a way to do it. In fact, if you have, let's say a blank template, this is probably the better way to do this because you have your settings set the way that you want, and you open that blank template document and just choose to import the MusicXML. It will add it as a new flow, but if you end up with two flows and you only need one, just delete the original flow. I think this is probably a much better way to do this if you're concerned about a lot of those types of things. So this is another way to do it. Now, somewhat related to this, I'm going to talk to you about the Library Manager, which can be found in the Library menu under Library Manager at the very bottom. There's this window here which I want to show you, but once again, I do need to set up some different files. So sit tight once again, and I will be right back. All right, so what you're looking at here is that same Brahms piece, and the way I imported this was I went to the file, I went to open, and just open the MusicXML file directly. And this is what I've been doing previously in this video. And again, that will just open the XML file into a default document in Dorico. So now let's look at the Library Managers. Again, in the Library menu, Library Manager. And I'm just going to briefly talk to you about how this window works. So basically, you have on the left here, the upper left, called this project, and that's the file that you currently have open. And you're comparing it to, and you have some options here, the user library, which is what you have set up. Once you make some changes and make them permanent on your computer, that's your user library. But you can also compare it to the original factory settings of a Dorico file if you want to do that instead. or you can choose a specific Dorico project, and it even provides a little drop zone, which is nice. So I'm going to take that file that had those alternate fonts in it, and I'm going to put that there. And once you do that, what you're going to see is a lot of red and blue, right? Basically, if you have a blue check mark, that means that the options for that match between the two files that you're comparing, this project compared to the Dorico project that you just dropped in there, right? If you see a red not equal to sign, that means that there is no match. And the way that this works is that you just hover over it and press the thing, and then it turns green, and it will allow you to convert that. So if I choose the engraving options, for example, and just press that red not equals to sign, now you have a green left arrow, which is indicating that when you hit apply, all of the settings in the engraving options are going to get transferred from this file into this file. Now there's options for engraving, layout, notation, note, input, and playback options up here. And then there's also collections. And then this is where you're going to find stuff like the chord symbols kerning pairs, the font styles, the paragraph styles are here as well, a bunch of different things, assets that are related to the file. So all this stuff is important as well. With some of these options, the layout options, for example, you can also compare certain layouts to other layouts. In this case, you're going to compare the full score layout to the other full score layout. So sometimes if you're going to be doing this and you have a lot of layouts, you kind of have to go through each one of them and transfer the layout from one file to another so that they all match. But in this case, I'll just do it for the score. So full score to full score, convert the layout options. I'm also going to convert the notation options. And again, notation options can be flow specific. And this file that I dropped in here happens to have two flows. So I have to choose which of the notations options from these two flows I'm going to convert. There's very little difference between the two. I just choose the first one here and press the arrow again, playback options, sure. And then once all of that is green, you'll see the options are going to get green too. Now, again, nothing happens until you hit the apply button. What's really nice about this is that you have a lot of nuance and granularity here. You don't have to do these version on the left. You can do it on the right. So if I choose paragraph styles, for example, you see in the center, these are all of the different types of paragraph styles. And if I just wanted the lyrics to convert, I'll just press that one. And there's even, it'll give you some more information if you open this. So there's so much granularity here. You can choose very small options to convert very specific options, or you can just convert all of the paragraph styles and then they'll all turn green. Or if you just want all of the collections, just press that button and all of the collections will convert from one file to another. And you'll see that everything will be either green or blue, meaning that when you hit apply, it's going to transfer or it's already the same. So I've got everything green and blue. I'm going to hit apply. And once I do that, now everything is blue, which means that everything in this project on the right is now comparing correctly to this project that's open. And I'm just going to hit a close, and that will convert everything. And a lot of stuff gets fixed, or a lot of stuff gets changed to match the other file. In fact, if I look at the paragraph styles, that's the file that had the alternate font, the Nepomuk font. And indeed, that is set up for the default text, as well as the music font, the Leland that I had chosen for that as well. So a really great window here. And this doesn't have to be only used for XML import. You can do this between any two Dorico projects. So if you happen to have a project that you like the settings for, and you have another project that you didn't get to set those up for exactly right, you can do this. You can drag that file that you like into this option and then just, press the red non-equals to get the green arrows to your heart's content for whatever options you want. It's really, really powerful, this library manager. I just wanted to point that out because it is worth knowing about. All right, and so that's all I have to say about the library manager and MusicXML import into Dorico from Finale. There's a lot to it, and hopefully this information will go a long way, and you'll be able to convert your files to Dorico in a smart manner. And once again, I'll just reiterate the idea that I really think it's a good idea to export out of Finale now. It doesn't matter. Finale is not going to change. You might as well convert all of your Finale files to MusicXML, store them somewhere, back them up, etc. You'll have them, but only import them into Dorico when you need them, because again, the Dorico import is going to improve with every version potentially. So there could be more stuff that gets converted down the road. Also, you're gonna know the program a lot better, so you'll know what all of these things mean in terms of, forced duration and what it means to have the stems frozen in one way or another. So again, just my advice is export now, import as you need the files, right? All right, I hope this has helped. I've enjoyed presenting all of this material to you, and I look forward to seeing you soon on the next one. Thanks for watching.